To us, he said, voice smooth as the wine. 11 years. He clinked his glass against mine, the sound sharp and clear. In that moment, I imagined it as a starting pistol. You're quiet, he said. Not that I mind. You're always more interesting when you're thinking. I'm always thinking, I said. He smiled, but it was an economist's smile. Tight, efficient. Tell me. I wanted to say, I'm tallying your faults, Mark, the way you tally risk. Instead, I reached for the wine, stalling. I was just remembering our first date. That sushi place you swore by. You kept calling the waitress by her name, but it was printed on the check in front of you. He laughed a little too loud. You caught that, huh? You underestimate me. Never, he said, and his hand found mine on the table. Warm, but dry. No sweat, no trembling. Just perfect, even pressure. He finished his meal and set his fork down, fingers steepled. Do you remember why I picked you? I blinked. You said I had the best smile in the office. He shook his head, gently patronizing. No, it was because you could see the angle in every situation. You never reacted, not unless it would benefit you. You were the one person I couldn't read. Still can't half the time. He leaned in, lowering his voice. I need that, Tiff. I need someone at my back who's smarter than me. It sounded like a compliment. It sounded almost like love. And maybe it was, in Mark's world, where everything had to be negotiated, measured, justified. He reached for my hand again, his thumb tracing my knuckles. I have something I want to propose. Something big. But you have to promise not to freak out. The way he said propose made my chest flutter, like we were about to buy a summer home or try IVF again. Something couples did when they'd run out of smaller problems. Try me, I said, and set my wine glass down. My pulse was suddenly too loud in my ears. He looked away just for a moment, collecting himself. What if I told you I have a plan to solve everything? The money, the fertility treatments, all of it. It's unconventional, but if we do it right, we're set. No more stress. Mark, I started, but he held up a finger. Just listen. He looked at me, really looked at me, the way he did with his clients right before closing. I want to fake your death. I waited for him to laugh or crack a grin. When he didn't, I stared at my plate. That's not funny. It's not a joke. I glanced at the kitchen door, half expecting my mother to walk in, wagging a finger. You're serious? It works, Tiffany. People do it all the time. Insurance fraud, witness protection, whatever. Only difference is, we do it smarter. We plan every angle. You go off the grid for a while, 6, maybe 12 months. I collect on your life insurance, invest it, set up a new life for both of us. You come back. Simple. I tried to picture it. Mark's face in the casket, the church full of mourners, the cloying scent of lilies. No, my face in the casket. Mark stoic at the front row, his hand squeezing my mother's. Then me, in some hideaway, watching it all unfold through a screen. How would it even work? I said, my own voice sounding distant. We stage an accident. Something with no body, but enough evidence to be plausible. You'd drown on vacation or disappear in a hiking accident. I make the call, file the reports, collect the policy. He recited the details with the same confidence he used to explain tax shelters. I watched his mouth, the way his lips curled on the word policy. He loved insurance more than he ever loved me. I'd be gone for a year. At least, I said. You could live with that? He hesitated, just for a flicker. If it means we can have a real future, yes. And when I come back? He squeezed my hand again, harder this time. We vanish. New names, new city, clean slate. And you'd do it with me. You wouldn't just take the money and run. The question lingered between us, sharp as a knife. Mark didn't flinch. I'd never leave you. I believed him, in the way you believe the weather forecast. You know it's probably wrong, but you can't help hoping for sun. We sat in silence. The kitchen clock ticked loud, a metronome for panic. I tried to imagine life without Mark, and the image came so easily it made my chest ache. But I also imagined the years spent clawing at his ambition, trying to keep up, always one lie behind. Maybe this was freedom. "You're thinking about it," he said, and for the first time there was a tremor in his voice. Not fear, excitement. "I'm thinking about how many things could go wrong," I said. "If I say yes, I'm trusting you with my life." He smiled finally, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'd never let anything happen to you, Tiffany. Never." I stood, scooping up the plates. We'd need a plan. Not just for the accident, but for everything. The story, the timeline, the alibis. He stood too, suddenly energized. That's the beauty of it. We do it together, just like we always do. He followed me to the sink, his hands at my waist. The intimacy of it should have felt comforting, but instead it reminded me of those medieval paintings where the devil wears a crown of gold. I let myself lean back into him anyway. "Tomorrow," I said. "We start tomorrow." He kissed the top of my head, and I wondered whether it was a benediction or a curse. By noon the next day, we had a binder. Mark named it Operation Lazarus, a joke that soured every time I looked at it. The first page was a flowchart drawn in his precise block letters, boxes and arrows, deadlines, contingencies. I recognized my own handwriting, years of shared calendars and mutual to-do lists, my print growing smaller in the margins as his took over the center. We started with the accident. "It has to be credible," he said, scrolling through news stories on his laptop. "No body, no crime scene, but just enough chaos that nobody looks too hard." "Drowning," I offered. "I never learned to swim." "Mom always said I'd die in a pool someday." He considered it, head tilted. "It could work, but lakes are unpredictable. Too many variables. We need something with less exposure." "Car accident," I said. "You can make a car vanish." He raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Or hiking. You fall into a ravine. Nobody finds you for weeks, or ever." We set it up with receipts, photos, cell tower records. He looked at me with naked admiration. "This is why I married you." "Romantic," I said. He grinned, but it faded quickly. "We'll need a burner phone. Also, you can't use your real name after the accident. Everything has to be airtight." We spent the afternoon building our alibi. He'd book us a trip to a national park, rent a cabin for a week. I'd disappear on a solo hike while he did paperwork in town. After a couple of days, he'd call search and rescue, tears in his voice, his wife missing in the wilderness. The rangers would comb the forest for weeks, and the news would run the story with my high school yearbook photo. "Can you cry on command?" I asked, not quite joking. He demonstrated, face crumpling with practiced sorrow. He looked so convincing that for a second I almost reached to comfort him. "You're sick," I said, but I was smiling. He sat back, rubbing his temples. "Once the story's out there, you'll need to go dark. No phone, no email, no cards. We set up a cash drop and you check in from a burner every 2 weeks. No more, no less." "You've thought about this before," I said. He paused, then shrugged. "I watch a lot of Dateline." I wondered if that was true, or if he'd been planning this since the day we met. Either way, he knew every step. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, Mark's breath slow and steady beside me. I watched the digital clock crawl from 1:11 to 2:47 to 4:00. I thought about my mother, her voice when she called every Sunday, the way she still said, "I love you" at the end of every call, even though I usually just said, "Me too." I thought about the women in my office, how they would react to the news, some genuinely grieving, some already drafting LinkedIn posts about cherished memories. Mostly, I thought about Mark, about the way he could love me and still see me as a means to an end. And I wondered if that was really so terrible, or just the best any of us could expect. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. The next few days were a blur of logistics. Mark moved through the world with a predator's focus, closing out loose ends, laying groundwork. I followed his lead, erasing my browser history, backing up files, writing coded messages that only I would know how to decrypt. We argued about the smallest things: what time of day I should go missing, whether I should leave a note, how quickly he should call my mother. There was a comfort in the bickering, a reminder of ordinary life. He was insistent on one point. You cannot contact anyone, not a single person, not even your mom. If you do, we're both screwed. I get it, I said, even though I didn't. You don't have to remind me every hour. I'm not patronizing you, Tiff. I'm just making sure. I'm not an idiot. He softened, then, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. No, you're the only one who could pull this off. The morning we were set to leave, Mark made us breakfast. He called it the Last Supper, and I pretended not to hate the joke. He poured my coffee, black, the way I liked it, and we ate in silence. At the end, he stood and cupped my face in both hands. I love you, he said, voice thick. I swallowed. I love you too. Later, as we drove north through endless pine forests, he kept one hand on my knee, his thumb stroking a rhythm that matched the thumping of the tires. He hummed along to the radio, tapping the steering wheel, every so often glancing at me with something like pride. I wondered if this was the real Mark, relaxed, in control, happy, or if it was just another performance, a dry run for his new role as grieving widower. We reached the cabin after dark. Mark insisted on unpacking the car himself, sending me inside with a flashlight and the admonition to get comfortable. The cabin was small but cozy. Plaid curtains, battered couch, a wood stove already stacked with kindling. There was a guest book on the mantel full of earnest messages from past visitors. I picked it up and thumbed through, wondering if anyone had ever died here before. He made dinner, boxed mac and cheese because he'd forgotten to buy groceries, and we ate off our laps, legs touching under the wobbly coffee table. This is it, he said when we were done. Tomorrow's the big day. I tried to sleep, but every sound outside, every wind shudder, every creak sent adrenaline humming through me. I pictured myself falling into the ravine, shivering in the dark, while Mark drank wine by the fire and practiced his eulogy. I must have dozed, because I woke to his hand on my shoulder, gentle. It's time, he said, already dressed in his hiking gear. I dressed in layers, just as we'd planned, and we left the cabin together at sunrise. The trees were cloaked in fog, the air sharp and wet. Mark handed me a backpack, heavier than I expected. There's food, water, a change of clothes. Everything you'll need to get to the safe house. The trail's already mapped. You'll veer off at the fork by the red marker. Got it? I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He pulled me in for a kiss, long, hungry, final. Then he smiled, brushed a tear from my cheek, and turned away. I watched him walk down the path until he disappeared into the mist. When I could no longer see him, I turned the other way, following the instructions we'd rehearsed for weeks. The first step of my new life felt exactly like the last step of my old one. Tentative, a little desperate, and entirely irrevocably mine. The only thing more awkward than faking your own death is trying to look inconspicuous while buying bleach, a disposable cell phone, and a cheap bottle of vodka from the 24-hour Kroger in the same cart. The cashier, a girl with a peel-off tattoo blooming on her wrist, never blinked, just scanned and bagged and offered me a stiff, "Have a nice night." I almost wanted to thank her for not recognizing me from the local news. I'd staged the wreck after sunset, on a hairpin curve outside town that had claimed enough teenagers and deer to make it believable. I'd poured a line of synthetic oil across the road, then left my old Corolla with the engine running and driver's door open at the bottom of the embankment. Front end stoved against an obliging oak. The steering wheel had dented itself into the torn vinyl seat. My plan was for the cops to think I'd been thrown clear, dragged off by coyotes, or wandered into the woods, concussed and hopeless. The bleach in my trunk would confuse the search dogs, and the vodka bottles scattered through the floorboards would complete the sad, inevitable portrait of a woman whose life had outpaced her will to keep up. I hiked a quarter-mile through the woods to the employee lot behind the strip mall, changed my hoodie for a pilled Patagonia fleece, and used a greasy rag to wipe the Corolla's key fob clean before stashing it in a trash can outside Goodwill. The city bus came through every 40 minutes, and if you wore sunglasses, headphones, and a haggard look, nobody bothered you. I spent the night in a bus station restroom, rinsing the blood off my hands, just a few streaks from digging my palms into the bark, not nearly enough for a real accident, but enough to sell the story. At 6:13 a.m., while the commuters were still shaking off sleep, I bought a Greyhound ticket out of habit, and then, at the last second, tossed it in the trash. I couldn't risk a paper trail, not even for the sentimental theater of it. My destination was the Budget Lodge on Route 48, a squat cinder-block building whose sign alternated between sleep and check-in, depending on the state of the neon. The room smelled like onion rings and stale cigarettes, and the television refused to show anything but C-SPAN. I wedged the desk chair under the door handle and spent the next hour sitting cross-legged on the bed, going over every step in my mind. It had been 2 days since I'd last heard Mark's voice. I wondered if he'd even noticed the absence before the police called him. The funeral was scheduled for a Friday, 10 a.m. at St. Luke's. I found out because Mrs. Clark, my mother, posted the details on her Facebook page with a photo of me in a graduation gown, smiley and green-eyed, the last time I'd looked healthy. The news had already reached the local paper's website. Area woman presumed dead in car crash. The comment section turned into a battleground between people who wanted to canonize me and people who speculated that I'd been texting while driving. It was perversely soothing to read about my own demise. I spent the next 3 days perfecting my disguise: a pixie wig from the costume store, brown contact lenses, fake glasses with the label still on the lens. I layered on thrift store clothes and let myself look puffy, exhausted, utterly unremarkable. On the morning of my own funeral, I sat in a borrowed Camry across the street from St. Luke's and watched the mourners trickle in. They came in clusters, shivering in black, even though it was 80 degrees. My mother was early, of course, holding a sheaf of wilted lilies and wearing the powder blue pantsuit she'd once worn to my wedding. She looked lost, her mouth set in a thin, stubborn line. Beside her stood Mark, wearing my favorite tie of his, the one with the subtle herringbone. He looked appropriately haggard, a little gaunt, but his posture was straight and his shoes were perfectly shined. Grief made him look younger, almost like the boy I'd first fallen for. I waited until the last possible second, then ducked through the side entrance of the church. The vestibule was empty except for a row of brass umbrella stands. I took a program from the table and slipped into the very back row. The eulogy was performed by a deacon who'd never met me. His voice tripped over my name, mispronouncing it at least twice, but his platitudes were on point. Resilience, bright light, taken too soon. I'd always wondered what people would say about me when I was gone. It turned out the answer was not much. It was at the reception afterward, held in the shadow of the cheap catering trays and styrofoam cups of lemonade, that I saw Mark with Karen Mitchell. Karen's hair was shorter than I remembered, more severe, and she wore a navy sheath dress that looked like it cost 3 paychecks. They stood just far enough apart for plausible deniability, but I'd spent years cataloging Mark's tells. The way his hand hovered behind the small of her back, the way he leaned in when she spoke. I watched from the hallway as Mark's face softened, then hardened. He said something I couldn't hear, and Karen touched his wrist just once, like a code. His smile was private and brief. Then she pulled away, blinking rapidly, and I knew. I'd suspected the affair, but until that moment I'd held on to the one pathetic hope that Mark was innocent. I went back to my car and sat there until the sun blistered my arms through the windshield. Every lie, every practiced apology, every canceled dinner and late-night client call replayed itself in high definition. I drove to the budget lodge and fell face first onto the bed, still in my funeral disguise, and cried for a long time. The tears were part grief, part humiliation, and part a strange, raw relief that I could finally stop pretending. I didn't sleep. Instead, I set up the burner phone and ran through the list of options the private investigator had left me. Fake social security number, prepaid debit card, a blank resume, and a new email account. Her instructions were clear. Lie low, don't contact anyone, stay boring. I was supposed to become someone whose absence was a foregone conclusion. At 2:17 a.m., the phone vibrated. I'd only given the number to the investigator and I'd paid her in cash, so either she'd betrayed me or Mark was smarter than I'd allowed myself to believe. The message was a single line: "You must stay dead forever. You are dead now. Never meet me again, or I will kill you with my own hands." I stared at the screen, knuckles white around the plastic casing. That's when I realized I wasn't in his plan. While he was collaborating with me to get the money yesterday, today he was threatening me with death. I thought about how easy it had been for him to move on, to grieve for me in public and fuck Karen Mitchell in private. I thought about my mother, alone in her house, believing her daughter was dust and memory. At dawn, I walked out to the parking lot and watched the sunrise burn the motel's plastic sign from check-in to sleep. I lit a cigarette and crushed it out after 2 drags. Then I went back to my room, packed my bag, and started planning how to haunt Mark Thompson until the day he wished I'd really died. The morning after my epiphany, the investigator, a bored woman with a platinum bob and a North Face jacket that never quite zipped up, had met me at a mall food court, as if conspicuous banality was a shield. She handed me a slim manila envelope across the table, as if she was delivering a subpoena. Inside was my new life. Illinois plates for a 10-year-old Accord, a library card, a letter from an imaginary employer, and a pair of ratty house keys. My new address was a 1-bedroom walk-up on Willow Street, the same block as Karen Mitchell. That was no accident. I studied Karen's routine with the discipline of a stalker and the detachment of a zoologist. She left for work at 7:28 a.m., wore crisp suits with kitten heels, and jogged after dinner in black leggings with the logo cut off. Some nights she stayed in, ordering Thai and watching TV. Other times she went out, returning tipsy but never sloppy. I'd expected her to be smug or brittle, but she wasn't. She was just a woman living her life, carving order from the mess. The first time I saw Mark, it was from the window of my new place. He looked older, or maybe just less lacquered. His beard was longer, eyes darker. He'd lost weight. I wanted to believe that was because he missed me, but I doubted it. I watched him help Karen out of the car, his hand low on her back, his mouth moving in a line of invisible dialogue. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I remembered the rhythm of his manipulations, the way he layered concern over command, the way his jaw flexed when he wanted you to feel guilty. I counted the seconds it took Karen to recover from whatever barbed compliment or subtle correction he'd lobbed her way. 13 seconds, the exact time it took me in the early days. My first move was a postcard. I chose one with a cat because it was so aggressively neutral that it bordered on the sinister. I wrote, "Thinking of you. Hope you're well. No return address, just an old inside joke only Mark would recognize. I left it in their mailbox with 100 other grocery flyers, then waited. The next day, Mark stormed into the lobby of my building, red-faced and wild-eyed, clutching the postcard like it was a ransom note. The landlord, a retired nurse with hands like spatulas, let him in with a shrug. I watched from behind my peephole as Mark paced the hallway, muttering. Eventually he left, but not before tearing the card into quarters and leaving the pieces in the trash. I waited until midnight to fish them out and tape them together, just to see if he'd written anything in invisible Arner phone and texted him from a random number. Do you ever wonder what people say about you when you're gone? He didn't reply, but I saw him check his phone at least 10 times in the coffee shop across the street. He ordered an extra espresso and drank it in one bitter shot. I set my trap slowly. A mutual friend liked an old photo of the three of us on Facebook. A hair clip went missing from Karen's gym bag and reappeared in her mailbox with a blank note. The pharmacist called to confirm a prescription for a medication I'd stopped taking 2 years ago, and Mark drove across town to ask why. I watched him from the window, watched him interrogate the clerk with a voice so calm and clinical it gave me chills. He left empty-handed. My own days settled into a routine. Sometimes I jogged the perimeter of the park, keeping pace with Karen from a distance. The first time I bumped into her by accident, she didn't recognize me. Of course not. The brown contacts, the choppy hair, the new posture. I apologized for stepping on her foot, and she smiled, tight and polite. "No worries," she said. "You're new here, right?" We saw each other a second time, then a third. By the fourth accidental encounter, she started to remember my name. We had coffee at the shop on the corner, both of us pretending to be strangers making small talk. I asked about her job. Some kind of marketing, right? And she told me about the office drama with a laugh that sounded like a cough. I asked about her boyfriend, and she hesitated, then said, "He's in finance, I guess." Boring, right? I pretended to commiserate. I could see the outline of Mark's toxicity already working on her. I became a regular fixture in Karen's world. Gym, coffee shop, pharmacy, even the lobby of her building when her packages were too heavy to carry. She never invited me into her apartment, but she didn't need to. I'd already mapped her life in concentric circles, moving closer with each revolution. The guilt gnawed at me sometimes, but I told myself it was a necessary evil. Mark needed to pay, and Karen needed to be free. The campaign against Mark escalated in increments. I hacked into his Venmo and sent $1 to a dozen of his clients, the memo field reading, "You can't erase the past." I subscribed him to newsletters for grief counseling and divorce mediation. I left a single tulip on his windshield, the same kind he'd bought for me when he apologized for the first time he cheated. He confronted Karen about it, and she called me in tears, confused and scared. I soothed her over the phone, telling her maybe it was just a prank, maybe Mark was overreacting. She believed me, or wanted to. Some nights, I watched Mark pace in his own apartment, shirtless, talking on the phone. He was unraveling, but it was controlled chaos, the kind that always preceded a power play. He'd find a way to flip the script, to make Karen the villain, to make himself the victim. I needed to move faster, so I broke into his car. It was stupid, but the adrenaline was worth it. I left a single earring, one of mine, cheap and tarnished, in the cup holder. The next day, Karen confronted him in the parking lot. I watched from the window as they argued, Karen's voice pitched high and desperate. Mark denied everything, but he couldn't explain the earring. Karen cried, right there on the sidewalk, then drove away. Mark watched her taillights recede, his fists clenched at his sides. I felt nothing but satisfaction. My phone buzzed that night. The message was from an unknown number, but I knew the cadence. "You're clever, Tiff, but you were always too sentimental. While you have died for everyone, you will also die for me, in my hands." I almost replied, but but I knew that was what he wanted, a sign of life, a crack in the mask. Instead, I deleted the message and went to sleep with the earring in my palm, as if it was a lucky talisman. The next morning, Karen knocked on my door. She looked hollowed out, eyes rimmed red, mascara streaked. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice trembling. I let her inside and made tea. She told me everything about Mark's temper, his disappearances, the gaslighting that had become her reality. She said she felt crazy, like she was the one unraveling. I told her she wasn't. I told her I believed her, and I did. When she left, she hugged me. She held on a second longer than necessary, as if I was a lifeline she couldn't name. I hugged her back, and in that moment I felt the first pang of guilt, a real human emotion, sharp as a tack. I wasn't sure if I was helping her or just using her for my own revenge, but I was in too deep to pull out now. Mark was next, and this time he wouldn't see it coming. By early May, Mark was a ruin. He'd started skipping the gym, skipped at least 2 haircuts, and his tailored suits hung on him like scarecrow costumes. He hadn't posted on LinkedIn in weeks, which was the first sign his world was shifting off its axis. The second was the way he lurked in the lobby of our building, sometimes for hours, scrolling through his phone and scanning every face that walked through the glass doors. I didn't need to follow him anymore. He had begun to haunt himself. My own efforts became less subtle. I sent him a copy of his own resume, annotated in red pen with questions only he and I could answer. On the back, I printed a phrase he'd used to explain away his first affair: "Habit is stronger than reason." I left a thumb drive in his mailbox with a single audio file, a heavily filtered clip of my voice reading the first paragraph of his college thesis. I wasn't sure what effect it would have, but within hours, Karen texted me a frantic SOS. Is it normal for a grown man to search for hidden cameras in his own apartment? Mark is losing it. Please tell me this is normal post-trauma stuff. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the evening watching him pace around his unit through a gap in my curtains, waiting for him to do something rash. He didn't, not at first. But the next day, he called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years, then spent 3 hours on his balcony, chain smoking and muttering to himself. It was a good thing he hadn't gone to the office, because that's where James Alvarez was waiting. James Alvarez was a curiosity, a detective who hated confrontation, but lived for the game of it. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd once been handsome, but decades of coffee and disappointment had roughed the edges. He moved through the world with careful, deliberate steps, as if always anticipating an ambush. I'd read about him before I died. He'd solved the Braddock embezzlement, the local judge's wife who laundered drug money through her dog grooming business. Alvarez had a reputation for finding things that didn't want to be found. He first appeared in my orbit when the mail carrier delivered a business card, tucked into a plain white envelope. No note. The card was heavy, matte, with his name and number embossed in a font that screamed state budget. I didn't recognize the name at first, but I Googled it, then spent the rest of the day reading about his victories and his failures. He'd lost a daughter to an overdose, a wife to a second marriage, and still he chased ghosts with the tenacity of someone who believed in redemption. When Alvarez started sniffing around Mark's office, I got the tip-off from Karen. She called me, voice low and urgent. "Some cop was at the building today asking about you, about the insurance stuff. Are you—" She hesitated, as if saying my name might conjure me from the dead. "Are you sure everything is okay with that?" I laughed, a brittle sound. "I didn't take out the policy, Karen." Mark did. "And if anyone is guilty of fraud, it's not me." She exhaled, slow and unsteady. "I know. You're my only friend who gets it. I think he's really in trouble. I think he's scared." "Let him be scared," I wanted to say. "Let him live in the shadow he cast." Instead, I told her to keep her head down, to ignore any calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She agreed, and I could hear the gratitude in her voice, that small, pathetic relief that someone was looking out for her. Meanwhile, Mark tried to regroup. He installed a new deadbolt, then a second. He changed his passwords, then reset them again. He started carrying a weapon, a small canister of pepper spray, which I found laughably inadequate. He even bought a security camera for the hallway, pointing it at his own front door. I considered leaving him a gift there, but decided that would be too easy. Instead, I decided to escalate my campaign at the office. Mark's assistant was the kind of woman who never said no to a polite request. So when Emily called and asked if Mark was available, she patched me through without hesitation. I disguised my voice, softened the edges. "Mark Thompson, please hold for a Miss Clark," I said, then played 30 seconds of silence before hanging up. I repeated this every day for a week. By the end of it, Mark had taken a leave of absence. His assistant was so frazzled that she started bringing her lunch in a thermos, too nervous to leave her desk even for a salad. The office manager sent out a memo warning about hoax calls, but the damage was done. Mark was radioactive. James Alvarez made his second appearance one Wednesday afternoon, sitting in a battered Corolla across from my building, reading a case file while sipping drive-through coffee. I watched him for a full hour, clocking the way his gaze flicked between the door and the upper windows, the way he took careful notes in a legal pad with a fountain pen. When he finally left, I felt a cold rush of anxiety. Alvarez was a threat, not because he'd catch me, but because he might scare Karen off, or worse, tip Mark into violence. I needed to keep ahead of both of them. I started spending my nights prepping an alibi, receipts for every meal, public library check-ins, selfies at the gym with random strangers in the background. I deleted cookies and wiped my phone, then bought a second burner and kept it in a tin box under the sink. I was careful. Mark had taught me to be careful. Karen, meanwhile, was falling apart. She'd stopped jogging, stopped going to work. Some mornings, she didn't even get dressed. She called me every day, sometimes twice. We talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite movies, the way certain songs could conjure entire years. I tried to remind her of who she'd been before Mark, and she clung to those memories like a drowning person to a rope. One night, she called and just sobbed into the phone for 10 minutes straight. I listened, said nothing, let her cry. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. I did. I knew exactly who she was, and I was determined to give her back to herself. It was around then that I realized the game was almost over. Mark was teetering, Alvarez was circling, and Karen was primed for a rescue. All I had to do was push, one last time, and watch the whole thing collapse. So I waited for the right moment, the right night, the perfect intersection of fear and opportunity. Then I made my move. The night Karen finally broke, I found her in my doorway clutching a bottle of Malbec and a legal pad full of scribbled numbers. Her hair was unwashed, the circles under her eyes bruised and deep. She looked so raw, I half expected her to start molting. "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice cracking on the second word. She held out the wine like a peace offering, but it trembled in her grip. "Please, can I just stay here for a while?" I nodded and stepped aside, sweeping the stack of library books off the futon. I could feel her gaze tracing the room, cataloging its differences from her own. The bare walls, the unmade bed, the jar of peanut butter and plastic spoon on the kitchenette counter. I thought about apologizing for the mess, but realized she needed to see that a life could be this simple and still function. She poured herself a glass and set the legal pad on the table, then collapsed onto the futon, legs folding under her like she was trying to make herself smaller. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, it was a confession. "I think I made a mistake. With Mark. With all of it. I sat on the edge of the futon, close but not touching. What happened? She drained half the glass, wiped her mouth on her wrist. He's been acting insane. He's up all night, reading my texts, searching through my purse, asking me these questions that make no sense. Last night, he accused me of plotting against him with you. She laughed, a ragged edge to it. He's losing it, Em. And it's making me lose it, too. I kept my face neutral, a trick I'd learned in my old life. Has he ever hurt you? Her eyes flicked up, surprised. No, never. He just scares me sometimes, like he's not the man I thought he was. She gestured at the legal pad. Look at this. I found it in his desk. He's got lists, money he owes, calls he doesn't want me to know about, passwords. He even changed his will last week. I leaned in, scanning the pad. It was classic Mark. Organized columns, color-coded, every loose end itemized. But the most interesting part was the column headed Alvarez. I tapped it with my nail. Who's this? Karen shrugged. Some detective. He's been calling about the life insurance stuff, I guess. Mark acts like it's no big deal, but he's clearly freaked. I forced a frown, feigned concern. Do you think he's hiding something from you? She considered, then nodded. I do. He's obsessed with my old friend, Tiff, the one who died. He talks about her all the time. Sometimes I think he wishes I was her. Her voice faltered, and she finished the wine in one gulp. I wanted to take her by the shoulders and shake the truth into her, but instead I said, "You deserve to know what's really going on." Karen looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to match my face with some memory she couldn't quite reach. "Will you help me?" she asked, voice very small. "Of course," I said, and meant it. The next day, I helped her gather her things while Mark was at a networking event, his cover for crisis drinking. We packed only the essentials: passport, laptop, a box of keepsakes, the silk pajamas she'd splurged on after her last promotion. I didn't ask why she needed those, but I was glad she did. There was something beautifully petty about choosing comfort in the middle of disaster. We moved her into my apartment at dusk, working in silence. At one point, Karen opened her laptop and started scrolling through their joint bank account. I watched over her shoulder, quietly coaching her through the forensic audit. "Here," I pointed. "These transfers aren't monthly. They're random. And look at the memo fields. Consulting, medical, reimbursement. But it's all just going to his other checking account." She stared at the screen, mouth open. "He told me he was paying down my student loans." "He's paying someone, but it's not Navient." We dug deeper. Mark had started withdrawing large sums of cash 3 weeks before my death, and after the accident, the frequency increased. There were payments to shell companies I'd never heard of, then a cluster of Venmo transactions to names with no profile pictures. Karen went pale. What if he did something to her? To Tiff? I let the question hang, unspoken accusation thickening the air. "Maybe you should talk to Detective Alvarez," I said, "just in case." She nodded, dazed. Maybe I should. Meanwhile, Mark was unraveling on the other side of town. I followed him once, just to see what it looked like when he thought nobody was watching. He parked outside a convenience store, killed the engine, and sat with his head pressed against the steering wheel for 20 minutes. When he finally went inside, he bought cigarettes, Red Bull, and a stack of scratch-off tickets. I wondered if he expected to win, if he still believed he deserved luck. The next morning, I watched from my window as Alvarez pulled up in his Corolla and waited for Mark to emerge. He timed it perfectly, intercepting Mark just as he was lighting his first cigarette of the day. They stood on the curb talking. Alvarez asked questions with the patience of a man who had already solved the case. Mark fidgeted, smoked, stared at his shoes. After 5 minutes, Alvarez handed him a business card and walked away. Mark watched him go, then crumpled the card and threw it into the street. He looked up at my window, and for a second, I thought he saw me. I ducked behind the curtain, pulse hammering in my throat. When I checked my phone, Karen had texted, "Can we meet with Alvarez? I want to tell him everything." "Of course," I wrote back. That night, she and I rehearsed her statement, listing all the strange behaviors, the money, the threats. I told her not to mention me, to say she was acting on a friend's advice. She agreed, but I could sense her suspicion simmering just beneath the surface. "You know," she said, pouring the last of the Malbec, "you remind me so much of her. Of Tiff. Not the way you look, just your voice, your humor." She squinted at me, searching. "Isn't that weird?" I smiled. "Maybe you just miss her." She smiled back, and for a moment I thought it might be true. The meeting with Alvarez was less dramatic than I expected. He listened, took notes, asked gentle follow-ups. He never once accused, never tried to trap Karen. When it was over, he gave her his card and told her to call if she felt unsafe. Afterward, Karen and I went to the park and walked until our legs burned. She didn't say much, just kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting Mark to materialize out of the shadows. I thought about telling her the truth, my truth, but I wasn't sure she'd believe me or forgive me. We stopped by the lake and watched the reflection of the city lights on the water. Karen's breath was steady, her shoulders squared. "I'm leaving him," she said, "for good." I squeezed her hand. "I'll help you pack." That night, Mark sent her a single text, "I hope you're happy." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. I went to sleep with a strange mix of relief and dread swirling in my gut. The game was almost over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was about to make his last, desperate move. He'd always been a sore loser. Karen left on a Wednesday carrying only a single duffel bag and her grandmother's locket. The rest she said she'd replace, or not miss. I watched her cross the parking lot, shoulders squared and hair swinging like a curtain, and felt a rare surge of pride. It was the exact look I'd wanted to see on her, the final irreversible break from Mark. She was brave in her way, maybe braver than I'd ever been. My own plan was already in motion. I'd spent the last 48 hours prepping for the confrontation, rehearsing it in my mind like a courtroom drama. I knew how Mark thought, how he moved, how quickly he shifted from victim to accuser when he lost control. The trick would be to keep him on the line long enough to get what I needed, a clean confession, something even Alvarez couldn't ignore. I left a note in Mark's mailbox printed on Emily Reed's stationery. "I know what you did. You can't erase the past. Come clean, or I will." That evening, I set the stage. I borrowed Karen's spare apartment key and let myself into their place an hour before Mark was due home. The decor was pristine. No photos, no souvenirs, just neutral paint and catalog furniture. I sat on the couch, lights low, phone set to record and tucked between two couch cushions. My hands shook, just a little, as I waited. Mark arrived on schedule, his footsteps brisk and uneven. He flicked the lights on and froze when he saw me sitting there. What the fuck? His eyes darted around, searching for Karen, for backup, for something to anchor himself. I smiled, calm. "Hi, Mark. Sit down." He didn't move, so I patted the armchair across from me. "Please, it's important." He dropped his briefcase on the floor and sat, but his body coiled tight, every muscle on alert. He stared at me with something between hatred and hunger. "Who are you?" he asked. "What do you want?" I leaned forward. "You know who I am, Mark. You've always known. Maybe you didn't think I'd get this far, but here we are." He studied my face, searching for the cracks in my disguise. He found them eventually. The recognition landed with a low, guttural moan. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're dead? Even strangle me to death with your own hands. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" My voice was steady, colder than I'd expected. "But you didn't get what you wanted." You never do." He exhaled sharply, ran a hand over his jaw. "What is this? You're blackmailing me? Is that what this is?" I shrugged. "I just want the truth. The real truth. Not the story you spun for the cops, not the script you fed Karen." He sneered. "You want to play victim now? You faked your own death and let everyone believe you were gone. You made a fool of your own mother. That cut deeper than I liked, but I let it slide." He was silent for a long minute. "So what happens now?" "Now you talk," I said. "You tell me what you did. You tell me why, and maybe, if you're lucky, I won't ruin your life." His laugh was empty, echoing off the bare walls. "You think I care about that anymore? You think I have anything left to lose?" I tilted my head. "I know you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have paid off your credit cards or laundered money through Karen's accounts or lied to Detective Alvarez." He blinked, caught off guard. "Alvarez is a hack. He's got nothing." "He has enough," I countered, "and soon he'll have more." He flinched. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the frantic search for a new narrative. "You set me up," he said. "All this time you've been stalking me, making me look crazy." "That was the easy part," I admitted. "You did most of the work yourself." He shook his head, almost in admiration. "You were always smarter than me. That's why I hated you." The admission hung between us, heavy and sour. "I want to hear you say it," I said quietly. "I want to hear you admit what you did." He closed his eyes. "You're not recording this, are you?" I smiled, just enough to show my teeth. "Does it matter?" He opened his eyes, defeated. "Fine. You want the truth?" He leaned in, voice low and raw. "I never loved you." "Not really. I married you because I thought it would make me a better person. But you just reminded me what a piece of shit I am. So when you started talking about leaving, I figured, why not speed things up? Why not make it hurt a little?" He was crying now, not loud, but silent tears tracing the lines of his face. "I never really wanted you to die," he whispered. "I just wanted you gone." I let the silence stretch, letting his words fill the room. Then I stood, picked up my phone, and showed him the blinking red dot. "That's all I needed," I said. "Thanks for your honesty." He lunged then, all rage and panic, but I sidestepped him easily. He stumbled, hit his knees, and stayed there, shaking. "You're a monster," he said. I looked down at him, unafraid. "No, Mark. You are." I left him there, collapsed on the carpet, and walked out into the night. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. It was over. Or almost. One more move, and the board would be clear. I spent the night in my apartment, curled on the futon with the phone beside me like a loaded gun. I listened to Mark's confession on loop, letting every cruel syllable burrow in. I wanted to feel triumph, but mostly I felt empty, like I'd been emptied out and left to dry in the sun. I tried to call Karen, but she was radio silent. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face. First the cold mask, then the cracks. At dawn, someone pounded on my door. I sat up, heart hammering, but it was only Karen, hair wild and eyes swollen from crying. She barreled into the room and wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "He knows I messaged on my car last night. Just my name, written in red Sharpie. I think he's watching me." I pulled her inside, locked the door. "You're safe here," I said, hoping it was true. We spent the morning on the couch, trading stories, comparing wounds. For the first time since I'd come back from the dead, I let myself believe that healing was possible. I told her everything about Mark, the accidents, the staged death. She took it all in with a calm, eerie detachment. "I always wondered why you disappeared so completely," she said. "I guess I should have known you'd find a way to survive." I smiled, a real one. Sometimes you have to die to save yourself. Before noon, there was another knock. This time it was Mark, banging on the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. "Open up!" he shouted. "We need to talk, Tiffany." Now. Karen froze. I motioned for her to stay put, then opened the door just enough to block the entry. Mark's face was a ruin, bloodshot, flecks of spit on his lips, sweat beading his hairline. "You think you've won, don't you?" he hissed. I didn't answer. He pushed against the door, almost knocking me off balance. "Let me in," he demanded. "We're not done." Not by a long shot. Karen stood behind me, voice steady. "Go home, Mark. We're calling the police." He barked a laugh. "The police? Oh, you mean Detective Dipshit? He's got nothing. I'm not going anywhere until I get what I want." "And what's that?" I asked. He leaned in, voice dropping to a growl. "You. Gone. For real this time." He shoved the door open, sending me stumbling back. Karen screamed, but I managed to wedge myself between them before he could get to her. He lunged, hands out, and grabbed me by the shoulders. "Stop!" I gasped. "It's over, Mark." "You're done." He shook me, hard enough to rattle my teeth. "You ruined my life." He started sobbing then, loud and ugly. "You ruined everything." I broke his grip with a knee to his stomach. He doubled over, winded but not out. I braced for the next assault, but it never came. Instead, Mark looked up and saw Karen holding her phone, thumb hovering over the call button. "You're not even worth it," he spat at me, then turned to Karen. "But you were supposed to be on my side." She flinched but didn't back down. "I was never on your side, Mark. You just never noticed." For a moment, I thought he might hit her. Instead, he collapsed against the wall and slid to the floor, sobbing. I backed away, my whole body shaking. Then the sirens started. 2 squad cars rolled up, lights pulsing in the afternoon sun. Mark didn't run, just sat there catatonic as the officers cuffed him and read his rights. Karen and I stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around each other, watching as the man who had broken us was led away, hunched and silent. Alvarez showed up a few hours later. He looked tired but satisfied, as if he'd solved the last puzzle of a very long week. "You did good," he told me. "I'm going to need a statement, but the DA's office is already drafting immunity." I nodded, barely listening. I was too busy watching Karen, who was finally breathing freely for the first time in months. After the dust settled, I went back to my apartment, sat down on the futon, and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel empty anymore. The game was over. I'd survived, and this time, I didn't have to disappear. The days after Mark's arrest passed in a blur of forms, interviews, and the antiseptic glow of fluorescent lights. I talked with Alvarez at least 4 times, every detail of my death, my campaign, and the years of rot Mark had hidden behind his dental floss smile. Each time, Alvarez brought coffee and listened without judgment, like a priest in a conference room confessional. He never once called me by the wrong name. Karen came by the apartment once a week, at first just to pick up mail or laundry, but gradually she lingered. Sometimes she'd bring lunch. Other times she'd just collapse on the futon and read while I worked. We spoke less of Mark with each visit, our shared history ossifying into something like black humor. We swapped war stories, compared scars, and got addicted to the same bad TV. I taught her how to cook eggs without a microwave. She taught me how to sleep through thunderstorms. Mark's trial was dull, ugly, and mercifully brief. He pled out before the jury selection, signing away whatever future he thought he'd built. I got a job at the public library, shelving books and resetting the computers after bored teens tried to hack the filters. The work was easy, the hours flexible, and nobody cared that I didn't have a LinkedIn. I left the burner phones in a box under my bed, but sometimes I'd take one out just to turn it over in my hands, feeling the ghost weight of my old life. Karen started dating again, a pediatric nurse who liked crossword puzzles and could recite all the world capitals from memory. I approved, though I still ran background checks on him for the first 3 months, just to be sure. Mrs. Clark, my mother, was harder to face. I wrote her a letter first, 3 drafts before I got it right. When we finally met, it was at a park halfway between our cities. She arrived early, hair freshly set, wearing the same powder blue suit from my funeral. She hugged me for so long my arms went numb. "You look different," she said, stepping back and scanning my face. "I feel different," I replied. We walked the length of the park, talking about nothing and everything. She never asked why I'd left or how I'd survived. I think she already knew. At the end of the afternoon, she took my hand and squeezed it. "You're not alone," she said. "You never were." Walking home, I realized I didn't feel haunted anymore. I wasn't hiding from Mark or from myself. I wasn't dead. I was just alive in a way that felt brand new. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and watched the sun slice through the windows. I pulled on a threadbare sweatshirt and walked out onto the street, breathing in the cold, ordinary air. There was a whole world out here, waiting to be lived in. For the first time in years, I wanted it all. For more inspiring life stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Countless untold stories are waiting for you here. With heartfelt thanks. Until next time, I'm Tiffany from Smooth Revenge.